Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victor. Glad to have you. Glad to be here today.
I'm excited to have you on. This is going to be a lot of fun. We were chatting a little bit before, and some of the things that we're going to hopefully to get to. I'm going to have some questions on. We'll get there because I think it's going to help with the listeners a lot, and just to help, and in general, just help us evolve and become, raise it even more, evolve to another level or expand to another level in our life. So, thanks for taking the time. As my listeners know, I always get right into it, and I like to know how'd you get into what you're doing? What's your story, and what was your journey of doing what you're doing today? How'd you get there?
All right, so let me take a few steps back and kind of share with you where I came from. So originally from upstate New York, and what I did prior to what I'm doing now is quite a bit different. I was in full-time ministry, and so I worked on staff of a multi-site church. And one of the last things I did in that with that organization is I stood up a campus. I stood up one of the locations, and so my title was lead pastor, but I was essentially a campus pastor. For those that have any kind of context to that. And so I loved it. I was hardcore ministry. That was my passion. That was my life. And I really thought that's what I was going to be doing forever. And, things change. I married, kids, and things change. Organization grows, and realized, it was time to kind of chart a new course. And so my wife and I began thinking and considering where we want to go next. And so we moved down to Northern Virginia, just outside of DC, and I started pursuing a new business career, a new business path. But the foundations for what I'm doing came from my role. And so essentially, the gentleman that hired me, brought me onto his team, had a pretty unique development process. And at the time, I had no idea what it was, but I was thriving in it. And I later learned after a couple of years, it's coaching. It's what we call coaching today. And because of the role we're in the organization, and what we're doing is we're all about developing people, developing leaders, encouraging people to understand how they're wired, how they're made, and how they can take that and offer it as a contribution back into the community. And so really my job was to identify talent, develop that talent, and release that talent. That's what I was designed to do. That's what my role was. And so my supervisor, my boss, was doing that with me. And so we actually took a hard look at coaching. We went through a coaching program. Um, Not enough to necessarily get a certification, but definitely enough to understand the fundamentals and begin developing the skill. And I soaked it up. I absolutely absorbed it, loved it, and I started immediately using it with my staff, with volunteers, with key leaders, and with people coming to me for ministry questions. And that it was a pivot. It was an absolute pivotal moment. In fact, I had one person come to me from another church, and he just came with his wife. I'd met them in a group, and we spent like 30 minutes. And he's like, Pastor Greg, what you did for me in the last 30 minutes is more than I've gotten in 3 years at this other place. And it was simply a coaching process. And when we decided, so with that background, if you will, and moving to a new location, beginning to say, well, what kind of business can I build? What value can I bring to the market? Coaching and development and organizational help, that all of that came right to the top. And so I doubled down. I did a significant investment, earned my certifications, got my credentials, really got to understand coaching at a much deeper level. And then I began to go into what I'm doing. And then for about 3 years, my brand was my name. And then I began to realize I want to build something bigger than my name. So I did basically a rebranding and a reorg, and came out with 5C Consulting. And so really, so we have a coaching background with a consulting approach to problem solving. So I've been studying what consultants do and how consultants solve problems for businesses. And so now we bring both of these skill sets to the marketplace.
I love that. Does the 5C stand? Are they five literal C's that mean something?
Yeah, so I've had fun with this. We've developed a series of short lists, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll give you one. This is the one I kind of lead off with, and it's called the 5 practices. If you have your hand, if you're listening, we start with the index finger. We have critical thinking. What I mean by that is we use first principles, we use data analysis, logic. That's to identify and to solve problems. So critical thinking, and then the middle finger, central, is our core values. Okay, we operate around our core values. The ring finger is we're consciously human, and we treat people with dignity and respect. We include people in the conversation. We're consciously human in our solutions and in our approach. And then the small fingers, we're co-creative. What I mean by that is, don't give me an RFP. Don't say, hey, we have X problem. Go into a dark room, come up with your solution, and then propose it to me on paper, and then we'll never speak. We have to interact with the problem. We have to understand what it is and the context it's in, and the strengths and weaknesses that your organization or you as an individual bring to the problem. So we have to co-create the solution. And then the thumb, which works with all four of these, is our communication style. So we seek to, again, another list of C's: compelling, concise, candid.
I like that. I like the hand, I like the fingers to all that. It's that's pretty genius there.
And to wrap it off, you see those 5 elements, you have the fingerprints of a 5C engagement or a 5C experience.
Love that. When it comes to your experiences in coaching and so forth, right, and what you do, how important is it, developing leaders and so on and so forth? How important is self-awareness? How much does that play a role? Because a lot of the things I talk about is somebody will come up and tell me a problem, and I'm like, okay, let's there's a reason why. Let's dive in. Let's get some awareness to this, and we'll take it from there. What's that approach? How's that look like, and so much more?
Oh my gosh, self-awareness. And my mentors used to say that self-awareness is a wonderful thing. And if you are in business, or if you're a parent, or, if you're leading any other person, you're going to appreciate when the person you're leading has any level of self-awareness. You think about it, if, and let's use a church example here. Somebody wants to sing in the choir or sing in the worship team, yet they can't carry a tune in a suitcase. They're not aware of their gifting. Now, their passion may be real, their zeal may be real, but they haven't developed the skill, the capability yet to actually do what you need them to do. And so you now have to have a difficult conversation. You have to help them orient to where the reality is. One of my bosses, very early in my career, challenged me with this. And if you're on video here, if I hold my hand over my head and say, hey, look, you want to get here. Okay, you want to get to this altitude, and I'm holding my hand over my head. The problem is, you think, and I'm holding my hand at about my eye height, that you're here. Okay, you think you're here, so you think you've got 6 inches to go. The reality is, my hand's now under my chin. The reality is you've got a foot to go. And so if you can't properly diagnose where you are, whatever your goal is, it's going to be hard to get to. And another analogy is, imagine you're on a map, okay, and you have your destination. Let's just assume our destination is Disney World. Okay, we all want to go to Disney World. But if I don't know your origin, where you originate, giving you directions is really not going to work. So if I think I'm in New York, but I'm actually in Ohio, okay, generally go south. Okay, that's going to help. But if I don't tell you which roads to get on, it's not going to make any sense. So self-awareness is really about getting that GPS point of exactly where you are, and then knowing where you want to go, and then charting the course. But most people, in fact, I was doing some research on this recently, about 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware. That means 90 to 80, 85 to 90% of people are not self-aware.
That's just a staggering number, right? It's like in the conscious versus subconscious mind, right? How many people live in the conscious mind versus how many people are in autopilot in the subconscious? And it's 95% subconscious, 5% conscious. And it's like, same thing what you're saying, very close to that. And it's like, wow, people are living a life not being aware. So they're kind of like what you're saying, Disney World, but they're just going in whatever direction. They don't have a compass telling them where to go, or then knowing where they are. And so then it creates a lot of chaos in someone's life, right? It kind of leads to a place where they can't achieve what they want, or get to a level, or experience something without knowing where they are. I would say, would you also say it's like the same thing, like knowing what the issue you have to work on, or the problem you have to solve? If you're not aware of the problem, then the solution can't exist, or it can't be found. correct?
Yeah, which is that's why we use critical thinking and analysis to identify the problem. Most times organizations come to me with a symptom and not even fully understanding what the real issue is. And secondly, they don't they have yet to determine what the outcome they want is and how to measure that. And so they're coming to me with something that they feel, okay, we want X, we want, so and so to change their behavior, but they haven't diagnosed what the root cause is. They feel something is out of place. And so they haven't structured the problem in a way where the solution will actually be revealed. Coming back to self-awareness, because I think this is significant, especially for your listeners. Self-awareness actually goes down as you gain influence, authority, and power.
Pretty profound. I mean, I have an idea, but for the listeners, why is that?
So think about it. If you are in charge, there's less people that challenge you. People aren't going to challenge you because they're afraid to challenge you. So you're not going to get really, really good feedback. You're going to get what people think you want to hear. Secondly, if you've been successful, you're more likely to trust your instincts because you've demonstrated success rather than actually looking at reality. And so for those senior executives, those influential people, those people that have a lot of authority, success, influence, self-awareness actually can go down if you're not proactive against it.
I can totally see that because it's one of those things too. Like the ego gets more involved, right? Now you're like, well, I'm this person, right? You create that identity, and now you are that. So then you just become this instead of, well, yeah, I've got here, but I still have to stick to my roots, or I still have to challenge myself. I still have to, focus on where am I at, how the center of that, and that's where I think where the greats are. Like if you look at some of these individuals, it doesn't have to be billionaires and millionaires. There's other people too, but I'll just use them for example. A lot of them are more like, yeah, this is where I'm at, but I'm still, at that place. And this is where I think they have that massive, great success, and they continue because, like you said, if you lose self-awareness, it's just a matter of time before you're going to tank. I think it's a lot harder because you're not coming from that other place that you were before.
Absolutely agree. If you're losing track of where you are on a journey, it's kind of like you have your map, you have your destination, but the blue dot has disappeared. And now you're just driving towards, you're driving, you're moving, but you have no idea if you're getting closer to your goal or not.
That's so true. Now, how do you, if you don't mind breaking this down, because we're talking about problem solving, knowing self-awareness, and that can lead to that. How does that journey look like? What is the processes you utilize, if you don't mind sharing, when it comes to, or the importance of problem solving and looking at things from, I'm assuming you do this, but I'm just going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but like looking at things from different perspectives to figure out how to, see the problem in its whole perspective, 360-degree view, and then create solutions from that.
Yeah. So depending on what we're talking about here. So if we're talking about an individual, okay, versus an organization, there's going to be the conceptual process is the same, but the tactics is different. And so let me give you some tactics if we're working with an individual. What we do is we like to do what's called a robust discovery process. And that process is going to have its own unique flavor, but essentially we're going to try to understand a few things. One, we really want to get an understanding of what success looks like for you. But we also recognize that most people define success as it's been inherited through the key influences of their life rather than what they authentically define as success. So we recognize there's a few layers we've got to get through before they can actually identify what success looks like for themselves. But we need to get to that. Secondly, we can use some assessment tools, whether they're 360s or various, and I put them in three categories. You've got a cognitive category, you've got an affective category, and a cognitive category. The cognitive is really your intelligence, your skill, your capability, what you know, your level of intelligence. The affective is that kind of emotional personality. So like an MBTI or a DISC or a personality type assessment that gives us an insight into how you process communication, your preferences, your tendencies, how you tend to do things. It doesn't dictate what you will be successful at and what you won't, but it gives us a sense of your style. Okay, then we'll look at the conative, and that's a Colby type assessment that's going to understand your MO, how you are going to approach a problem and how you're going to solve it, whether you're going to start with research or you're going to dive head first in, or some other process that you're going to use. We also use a tool called Energy Leadership Index, and this comes back to our first principles, like how do you show up in a situation energetically? So we'll use these tools. We'll use what I call a custom life wheel, where we give you basically it's a chart with 12 pie slices on it. And we're going to give you a list of areas of life from business, finance, personal, like this whole bevy of lists. And we're going to ask you pick 12 that are important to you that you want to measure. So you kind of design your own life wheel and then you score it 1 to 10. Where are you on this chart right now? And then we'll take from that, we'll identify maybe 3 to 5 areas that you want to develop, and then we'll design a life wheel for each of those because they all break down. And then we'll get a clear sense of where we need to invest your time and energy to advance that category, whether it's a skill capability you need to develop, maybe it's a fear you need to overcome or a block you need to address. And so we can begin to chart out what we'll call a critical path to get you to your plan of to your place of success. So we got to define success. We got to diagnose where you are, create that self-awareness, and then we got to create that critical path to get you there.
I like that. I like that approach. I'm a data guy. I like data. I like points. I like references, because then that way you kind of know. Again, self awareness. We're coming back to that, to know where you are, and it's kind of like knowing your. Because I used to use DISC personalities for myself. Actually, even in my office with patients in the beginning of my career, I would do that only in the sake of understanding their communication. So that way, when I'm explaining what we're going to go over for the report and what I found and everything we're going through, I know that I'm addressing them in the way that they like to interpret it information or can be communicated to. Because if I'm with a hard driver, they're not going to want to hear research. They don't want me going in depth with things. They just want the nuts and bolts and let's move forward. Where that could be a 5 to 10 minute report where an analytical is going to be like, hey, I want the full 30. I want to know everything. Show me the research. I want you to send me research afterwards. I got to be able to analyze all this and so much more. I think that's great. Is there in that process that with it, know the person when you use the personality stuff, is that more for communication perspective? I know you mentioned a little bit of that. I just want to dive a little deeper into that, or is it used for other stuff too?
So we are authorized partners with everything DISC. I've been using DISC for over a decade now. I used it even before I was in this role and doing this business. Um, and we bring DISC into an organization specifically to address communication and to kind of create like an onboarding kind of culture, provide language and a framework where everybody can dialogue about their different styles. And so that DISC is a phenomenal tool for that. On a one-to-one, I probably would not use DISC simply because I can pretty much read it. So depending on what the objectives of the client are, and if that model is going to serve them in some way, we may bring it in. But because I'm so familiar with it, it's not something I need. And I always have to kind of decide which tools am I going to use because I can't bring all of them in, right? So you have to kind of pick your priorities. And so a lot of what's going to drive that is what we discover the client needs, and where they need to grow in awareness and what frameworks are going to serve them to get to their goal. But it's absolutely one of the ones that is in the toolbox that we could bring out at any time.
Love that. And so when it comes to coaching and doing coaching work and so forth, do you call it coaching or is it consulting? I know you have consulting on here, with what you do. I know you brought up coaching a little bit in the podcast. Is it one or the other? Or those words kind of blend together? Are they separate? How do you identify that?
Oh boy, you just hit a soapbox item for me. So coaching, mentoring, consulting, counseling, therapy, they're all very different things, right? And right now the way we approach it is I bring everything I have into my engagements. And coaching is a particular modality to serve a purpose. And so if I could break this down for your listeners, the way I've processed it, coaching has the fundamentals of very, very simply, the fundamentals of that the client has the solution within them. And the purpose of the coach is to help create a safe environment where you can draw the solution out and the client can take ownership of the solution and implement it. And it's a phenomenal modality, and it works really well with intelligent, competent people that really know how to solve a problem. It works really well with executive leaders. And so we bring executive coaching in for that reason, because you get somebody that is super intelligent, has a lot of confidence. The last thing that they're going to want is somebody to tell them what to do. So coaching can help them figure out what they need to do, provide the safe place and the accountability so that they can execute. So it's a phenomenal skill to have. Therapy and counseling is all about digging out pain from the past. Okay. And so we're not therapists, we're not counselors. It's a regulated industry. You have to be licensed, you have to be trained how to do that. What we do is we might go back to the past to say, hey, where have you had success? Where has this happened before? It's to help you move forward. Mentoring, the way we frame that is, this is somebody that's climbed the mountain that you want to climb and is willing to help give you guidance on how they got there. So they got the t-shirt, they've got the title, they've got the thing that you want. So if I wanted to go into podcasting, Victor, I might say, hey, Victor, what do you suggest I do to get started in podcasting? You've walked up that mountain. You've accumulated some success. I can learn from you and your experience. That's what a mentor is going to do. The coach, I've never been up that mountain, but I know you can get there, and I'm going to help you get there, and I'm going to be on the car ride all the way up. Now, the consultant is almost fundamentally different. The consultant you bring in to solve the problem and to deliver the solution. And so what I do is I blend the coaching, the mentoring, and the consulting. But blending, really what it looks like is on specific conversations, on specific topics. It's engaging with the client with exactly what they need at the moment. What I learned over time is a lot of the clients that I've worked with have reached out to me and say, Greg, I've chosen you to be my coach because you have this bevy of experience and I want to glean from it. And so we'll walk through, I'll use some consulting problem solving tactics with the client to say, hey, here's how we're going to approach the problem. What's your core objective? How does that get driven? You break it down. So I'm kind of walking them through the consulting process. So I'm giving them a problem solving framework and they're solving their own problem. And I'm coaching through that. So I don't know if that's muddy or if that answers your question, but happy to break it down a little further if you like.
I 100% get it because I have that same approach in my processes of what I do, because I love how you brought up, this is what a coach does. Like I think of when I look for a definition of, like, if I had to look at someone's picture of who a true coach is, who's never gotten to that level, but at the same token get other people there, I think of Phil Jackson with Michael Jordan. Maybe because I'm from Chicago too, that's why I'm a big fan of Michael Jordan anyhow. But it's one of the things where Phil Jackson never got to that level of success ever, but he was able to take a group of individuals and be able to, well, Michael Jordan, but then also the group of individuals, to have unbelievable success that we have not seen yet again in the NBA or in an individual. My bias, so just in case anybody's listening, like, wait a minute here, there's some other players. I'm like, I know I have a little bias to it. But that's how I look at a coach, and I look at other, great coaches. Like I'm a big baseball guy. So I look at when I see a coach, I'm always like, it's always fascinating that they may have not have gotten to the level of success, because the ones who've gotten to that great, like Michael Jordan, he's not a great coach per se. He can't, it's hard for the way he drives himself, very hard to teach others to do the same from that perspective. That's how I think of it from that way. But if you'd like to add on, I would love to hear more. But if you want to go a little deeper into it too, you can, because for the listeners.
Well, let me just build off Michael Jordan for a second. So there's a colleague of mine, and in the bottom of her email, she puts a Michael Jordan quote, and he says, "I've lost 300 games, 26 times. I have missed the final game-winning shot," and he's like, basically, I'm successful because I've failed more than anybody else. So I love that quote about Michael Jordan. And the second thing you just said, Michael Jordan may not be a great coach because he's not able to show somebody what he did, and that's right, because we're not here to create like copies of people, right? And I think this is a fundamental thing I'll share with you. How the approach we bring and why discovery is so important, whether it's working with an individual or working with an organization or working with a team. A few years back, I was working with a team of health coaches. I'd done some work for them, like they were some clients of mine, and then we got together. They said, "Hey, let's partner up," and I was like, "This makes sense to me." And so they brought me into their program, and they did their discovery. I did this survey, and then I got to sit down, and one of them, Corey, was like, "Greg, I want to do a nutrition plan for you. But one of the things that could be really helpful is getting a health DNA analysis. So not the ancestry one, but a health one." And so I was like, "Okay, let's do it." And so she had an organization that does it, and they're super legit. They, I get to own my own DNA. They don't like keep it on storage on file or anything like that. So I got the results back, and it was absolutely transformational, because what it did is it broke down my genetic code and how I process various proteins and fats and all this other stuff. And what it really illustrated to me is that I am that unique, to the point where, and I'll give you an example. Like what I learned was the protein in avocados, like my body doesn't break it down the way it should. And my wife loves avocado and guacamole, and so do I. So I have to stop after 4 scoops, basically, or my body is not going to be able to process it the way it should. And then so take this concept. We all have this unique genetic design, and yet there are all these different diet plans out there. You've got the Atkins, the Paleo, the South Beach. You can go on and on. And when somebody enrolls in these programs and then they don't get the result, and they say, "Oh my gosh, it must be me. I failed. I'm not working." Wait a second. You've just put a solution on something, and it's not a fit. It's not a fit. Or it's been designed to work for one complete category, one kind of broad genetic makeup category of people. And maybe you're in that category, maybe you're not. And so when we work with a client, we want to truly understand how they're designed. If we're working with an organization, like, "Hey, well, how do we help you get a strategic competitive advantage?" We've got to consider your weaknesses, your strengths, the market, your biggest competitor, and how do we get you to be relatively better than your competitor in one thing. And so you have to get down to the specifics. And this really kind of this is how you solve the problem. You've got to really get down to the specifics. And I think what happens is a lot of people will create a product or create a program, and then they simply get some success and they say, "Oh, now we've got to go to scale. Okay, we've got to take this thing to scale." And I don't know that it always works very well that way.
I think especially if you're not ready to scale and you're thinking you have to, that also becomes another big issue with that. But you bring up a great point, and I love this point. And I'll add a little bit to your health topic of this, where when we talk about individuality and uniqueness, in your gut, they call it the gut microbiome, or so forth. You have 500 to 1,000 bacterial strains that do not exist anywhere else in this world. So you take that number and you look at the 7.8 billion people in the world. That's a lot of unique strains to bacteria that exists individually within us. And you have your own, I have my own, and research shows it's roughly 500 to 1,000 unique strains that are not found anywhere else in the world. I always find that fascinating. So when you're talking about the DNA stuff, it's really cool when you do those kind of things. And I don't know if they use the term nutrigenomics, but that's usually when they're doing DNA to look at how the body processes things and looking how your body breaks things down. It's really fascinating things. I think that's like the new where we're going. That's where we're heading in health, where it's more of like that individual approach using science to back that up. Very, very cool stuff. But you have to take that in coaching. You can't cookie cut. That's my 2 cents on that. I always tell people, like, when they go, "Oh, I'm going to do this program. This is what we do." Like, I love your approach because yes, you have a system in place, but then it's like, yeah, but we're individual because we have to find through things. It's just like when a patient comes to me for chiropractic. My approach is in a certain way, and it seems like it's the same in a certain way, but it's also very unique when I develop the care plan and other things that I do, because it has to meet their needs, their lifestyle, where they're at, and we use different metrics to show the technology to show, hey, this is where you are. And then here's the work we're going to have to do. That's only for you. That's it. There's no one else that we can compare this to. It's you and only you. And we're going to work with
Mhm.
you to help you. And some journeys are easy, some are hard, because sometimes a lot of people go, my friend went to you, and within 2 weeks, they were like, oh my God, they were 10 times better. I said, don't get hooked on that. Well, what do you mean? Doesn't chiropractic do that? No. And number two, that was their journey. They got that. It worked out for them. Your journey is going to probably maybe different. And then usually when they get worse, they're always like, no, this is not what it's supposed to be. I'm like, this is, and I have to walk them through. So totally get
Yeah.
that. Totally vibe with you on that.
So this is one of the things I think we sent over to you is like I've kind of taken up the mantle on, boycotting the term best practice. And this kind of ties right into that. Now, in some cases, you can have a best practice, but in most cases, what people do is they find a best practice that's been a best practice for somebody else or for some organization, and they say, "Oh my gosh, that's best practice. We need to copy it." And that's where it falls apart because that best practice was tested and validated and designed in a different environment for a different goal. And unless you have exactly the same goal with exactly the same strengths and weaknesses, making that best practice yours is likely going to be a disaster. So, I mean, just think about it. If you take a practice from Google and you try to import it into Apple, okay, what's going to happen is it's not going to be a best practice. And so I see a lot of professionals kind of building up the idea of like, we have best practice. We're going to give you best practice. And it's kind of like almost a selling point. And I'm like, whoa, you got to look under the hood there before you start implementing somebody else's best practices and calling them your own, because they're likely not going to be best practices for you.
That's so true. I had someone, we talked about this on the set of intention, in that when you do something like this, I've been at fault of this in my early on in my career where I just found someone successful. Holy cow, what do you do? I'm going to model that. I'm going to take that on. And then I don't get the results they're getting. And I'm like, what's going on? I don't get this. And then I would go down this rabbit hole for a little bit. And then I'm like, hold up. How about if I just forget everything and just focus on me and just do my work and see what happens? And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, this couldn't be that easy. No. You start judging it because I'm like, no, it's supposed to be this complicated process, and then all of a sudden it's not, to a certain degree. But they were talking about intention, where you have an intention of what you want to do, but then if you're taking someone else's program or something else they do, whatever it is, and you're trying to create that, well, that's their intention, that's their vibe, that's what works for them. That may not work for you and how you are, because you don't want to become a robot of someone else. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox with that, but it's one of the things of creating your unique self in one way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Listen, I have been around the world. I have met thousands and thousands of people. And there's no two people alike. And so you are uniquely you, and you need to do the work of discovering who you are, your purpose, your strengths, your weaknesses, and you need to chart your own journey rather than allowing someone else to chart it for you.
I love that. Would you agree that, like, sometimes I think that the era we're in with information era, and then a lot of this, some people in the self-help world will always be like, success leaves clues. You want to follow what they do because they got there. Do you feel like we're moving away from that? Because what you're bringing up is, from my own experience, we're kind of breaking away from that and kind of just saying we got to go on our own journeys. It's good to have those kind of things, like a mentor, like we were kind of talking about, like, if you want to learn from how someone got there, but then it's more about going through your journey and be able to recreate that self-awareness to discover, that process to what you're going to bring to the world.
So I agree with you. And what I'm going to offer you is this. When you look at the history of knowledge, right? It's grown and it's continually growing, and it's growing so fast, Okay, we now have to prioritize. Okay, we now have to prioritize the information we're paying attention to. And what I think what we're talking about is giving you a filter so that you can prioritize and deprioritize. And that filter needs to be your own individuality.
I really resonate with that message because it is one of those things where I remember, what was it? It's about 6, 7 years ago now. No, a little about it, almost 10 years ago. Wow, time's flying. But long story short, I was always told you got to read a lot of books. Read a lot of books. Bill Gates reads as many books. These people read all these books. So I was like this overachiever. Like, okay, fine, 80 to 120 books a year. I'm gonna nail this, and I did it for a couple of years. And it was great, right? Learned a ton of things. I couldn't believe how many books I read so quick. But it came to a point where I was like not actually implementing it. What was I filtering? That's why I like
Yeah.
that word filter so much, because now I read, some people who've followed me in the past are like, are you still doing 80 to 120 books? What are you doing now? What are you listening to? What are you following? And I'm like, I don't know. I may read 10, maybe 5 books a year, 10, 15. They're like, that's all. I'm like, well, I still read and I still listen. There's something that comes up and I'm like, I need to learn this. Something feels like I need to follow this and I'll go into it, but I'm filtering through what I need to grab instead of trying to take
Mhm.
everything and then try to implement, which creates a lot of, at least in my experience, create a lot of failures. And now I'm sitting there going, I'm reading less, doing less in that aspect, but I'm gaining more and learning more. And I feel I'm evolving more because it's when I feel like I need to, or I need to learn something and filter what I want to get out of it rather than got to take everything in and, learn every little piece so I don't forget something.
Yeah, there's a delicate balance there because your business judgment is going to be informed by what you've been exposed to. Okay, so if you're not constantly consuming relevant information on your industry, on what's going on in the world, your business judgment will suffer from it. However, you cannot consume everything. And so you have to prioritize and deprioritize. And you have to think about like, okay, well, what information do I need to know to be successful in my role? And then you've got to look at that and create the systems and streams so that you can get the information you need. And information right now is coming out so fast. I mean, this is a fundamental problem that people are having and will continue to have. Is you think about it, if you're an executive, a senior executive in a regulated industry, okay, so think of HR right now, all right, depending on the state you're in, there is HR policies and laws that are changing so fast. They're, literally being updated every week, every month. And as an organization, you're supposed to keep up with that. So now you have to dedicate somebody's time and attention so they can pay attention to the changes. And this is going to continue. So you need to have a good filter, but you need to recognize that your business judgment is going to be based on what you are aware of. So it just means less leisure reading, as I think is going to come down to it, Dr. Vic.
I like that. That works for me. Um, Greg, love chatting here. Like to know, how can people find you, see what you're up to, see all the things that you're talking about, and see what you're doing and all that good stuff.
So common places, we've got my LinkedIn profile, Greg Ballard, I think is GW Ballard is my LinkedIn tag. Instagram, I use it for Clubhouse. Um, G Ballard with the second A dropped. And then my email, obviously, Greg at 5FIVE letter C dot consulting. And then of course our website, which we're constantly evaluating, developing and stuff. So those are the common places you can get me: LinkedIn, Instagram, email, website.
Awesome. For all the listeners, I'll have that in the show notes. Greg, this was fun. I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge in this information. And I got some input out of this. I know the listeners definitely did. And appreciate the work you're doing and everything you continue to do.
Hey, Dr. Vic, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've learned some things too. So thank you.
Awesome.